Coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast, Bruce Dickinson is going on tour late this summer and has 18 new songs demoed for his next album. Iron Savior has a brand new album coming out. I talk about the album that ended up getting me into death metal, and Alcatrazz has a brand new record deal, of course, a band that at one point featured Yngwie Malmsteen and Steve Vai. All of that coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Greetings and welcome back to another edition of the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you. Really excited, of course, as always, to be here for another episode of the show. And of course, if you do like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post any kind of content. And if you like this video, give it a like, leave a comment. And if you follow the show on any other form of social media, by all means, hit the like and or follow and or subscribe button there. Today's show, I am going to talk about Iron Savior with another Reforged album, which is a collection of re-recorded songs. I'm going to talk about why it is a necessity for them to do this and why they also wanted to do this. They have two other albums with collections of re-recorded songs from the early part of their career, and I'm going to touch on the upcoming album, Reforged Machine World. We also have not my favorite death metal album of all time, but definitely the album that ended up getting me into death metal. That would be the album Symbolic by, of course, the band Death. Alcatrazz, a band that many of you may remember, had Graham Bonnet, Steve Vai, Yngwie Malmsteen at one point were both in the band. They have a new record deal. And of course, they will be working on a new album. But let's start off with the subject I want to start this show off with, and that is Bruce Dickinson, one of, if not my favorite heavy metal vocalist of all time. Bruce has announced a tour to start in August here in the United States, and he has announced that he has 18 songs demoed for an upcoming album in 2026, or at least he's going to start recording it in 2026. Will it come out that year? I don't know, but I've received some emails asking me what I think that album may sound like. So let me talk about Bruce touring the States. I think that is a very significant thing. I think it's really cool that he's out there doing the solo thing again. Mandrake Project was definitely a welcome album, and I'll give you my ranking of where I put that in Bruce's discography, because that album ended up getting some mixed reviews. Nevertheless, I am excited to see the fact that this guy is on the road performing songs from his solo albums, because I think Bruce, if I were to pick a guy from a major band, if I had to pick my favorite group of solo albums from anybody that has been, that has been in any major heavy metal band, it would be Bruce. I love his solo stuff. None of the albums he's ever made has been the same either. It's all been very interesting stuff. So that tour starts in August. And it takes me back to when I saw Bruce on the Accident of Birth tour. I think it was September 22nd, 1997. I could be wrong in the date, but I believe I found the ticket stub to that, actually. They played in a venue called the Odeon. And it was Accident of Birth, maybe a whopping 200 people there, if that. I mean, when you think about that now, it's kind of disappointing. But they did come to the venue. I did get to meet Bruce. I met Roy Z. And I was a kid seeing my favorite singer ever at that point in time. And it was a great show. I mean, I remember they played a lot of Iron Maiden songs. They played Flight of Icarus. They played Power Slave. They played The Prisoner, I believe, if I remember correctly. But it was a phenomenal show. And even though there were like 200 people there, it felt larger than life for me. And I was actually going crazy in the crowd. I think it was 19 at the time when I went to that show. And I still have the t-shirts somewhere. But nevertheless, it was a phenomenal show. And I loved and still love Accident of Birth. It's probably one of my top 2 albums by Bruce. Now, I'm really interested. Now, I've had people email me asking me, what do I think his next solo album will sound like? And as I mentioned before, every single one of his solo albums sounds a lot different from the other. Granted, aside from the Mandrake Project, the 3 albums that preceded it, a lot of people think sound similar. I don't think that. I think The Chemical Wedding is a much different album than Accident of Birth, personally. It's a different vibe. It's a different record. Obviously, the first 3 albums, I mean, Tattooed Millionaire is kind of a more straight ahead classic hard rock album. If I were to kind of categorize it, Balls of Picasso is a very strange record, and Skunkworks is also kind of experimental as well. And Tyranny of Souls was kind of for me, the way I looked at it, sort of a combination of what you heard on Accident of Birth and Chemical Wedding. Mandrake Project, of course, has its own sound. It kind of sounds like a mix of a mix of Accident of Birth, maybe Chemical Wedding, along those lines. But generally speaking, I think that album is different as well. And where do I rank the Mandrake Project? Because it did get mixed reviews. There was a lot of hype behind the record, but when I looked at reviews for it, the reviews were mixed. Now, I like the record a lot, to the point where I ended up getting the big, huge special edition CD with the big comic book in it, and the album on vinyl as well. But if I were to rank it, here's me ranking the Bruce Dickinson albums. Chemical Wedding would be number 1. Accident of Birth would be number 2. I would probably have Tyranny of Souls 3. Mandrake Project 4. So I have Mandrake Project right in the middle. This will throw some of you off because this is probably unexpected, but I'd have Skunkworks 5th. And I'll explain to you why I have it there. You have Tattooed Millionaire 6th. Tattooed Millionaire 6th. And last but not least, I'd have Balls to Picasso, which I think is a very bizarre record. But Skunkworks I have 5th. When that came out, I was in high school. And I don't know what it was, but there was something about that album that I think really drew me into it. And, when going back and listening to Bruce Dickinson's solo career, there's something about the Skunkworks album I absolutely love. It's a much different record than he ever put out, obviously. But overall, I could still go back and listen to that album quite a bit. And those first 3 Bruce Dickinson albums were, in my opinion, were drastically different from each other. And pretty much mostly different from what he did in Iron Maiden, for the most part. So as far as what his next album might sound like, folks, I have no idea. I say that because I think each of the 7 albums this man has put out, they are all so different from each other. It's really kind of hard to predict. Could it be better because he got back into the swing of things and came out with a solo album and has some brand new songs coming out? Maybe. Maybe it won't be as good. So, most bands, you can kind of look at their track record and see that they're building up to something great. And that you think, okay, this next record's really probably going to be very good. But with Bruce, it's hard to tell. He might put out what I feel is his worst album, or he could put out what I feel is his best. Because these albums, in my opinion, are pretty diverse, especially compared to what he did in Iron Maiden. So it's really hard for me to really predict. It'll be interesting. His albums have always been very interesting to me upon the first listen, because there's some things you expect, and then there's some things on these records that you don't expect. So I'm looking forward to it. Kind of curious where your thoughts are, folks. Do you think his next album will be better than the Mandrake Project? Did you like or dislike the Mandrake Project? Leave a comment. I'm interested in hearing your opinion on it. Now let's go to another subject, one that I am excited for. Iron Savior. Iron Savior has another album coming out of re-recorded songs. It's called Reforged Machine World. They have two other albums that came out under the Reforged title. Reforged, Riding on Fire, and then obviously you had Ironbound. And it is a collection of re-recorded songs from the earlier part of their career. Now they are on a new record label called Perception Label. I do not know much about that record label other than the fact I believe it's part of Reigning Phoenix Music from what I saw, which actually is a very, very good thing for them. I think this will be a better situation for them than AFM was. But I don't know much about Perception Label other than the fact that Iron Savior and a few other bands are on it. So I can't really go into detail other than the fact I do think it is great. They are part of Reigning Phoenix Music. So let's talk about this. The band is putting out re-recorded songs. Now, I've seen some comments when they have posted about this, like, why would you do this? Why is the band doing this? And the best explanation I can give you is from Pete Seelig himself. Check this out. Here's an interview clip from about 2 or 3 years ago now, where we talked about why he decided to do these reforged albums with a bunch of re-recorded songs. Here you go. I really like the fact that you did these re-recordings. I think the Riding on Fire, I thought was really, really cool. I thought some of these songs sound-wise and even, somewhat composition-wise, I think sounded a lot better. And, what initially made you want to do this? What initially got into your head to go and re-record these tracks and do these albums?
Well, I mean, the main driving for a reason for that was that for many years the entire Noise back catalog wasn't available.
Sure.
It was not re-released. It was not even on iTunes or on any digital platform, and that started to suck really hard for me. And since there was no way to regain the rights of those recordings. Because when Noise went bankrupt, Noise was now I remember. Noise was taken over by Sanctuary Records, the former Maiden label, and I thought, wow, okay, Sanctuary, wow. Well, 2 years later, Sanctuary was bankrupt because they just expanded too much, and I think all the entire Sanctuary back catalog, also the Noise catalog, was sold to I think to Universal, and Universal then I think they either keep it, they still have it in some of their drawers, or I think the rights for Iron Savior are with a subdivision of Universal. I tried to figure out where they are and who I would talk to get them back. I failed. It was not possible. And on the other hand, the price would have been. I heard of Tankard doing that, and what Tankard paid for them, I thought that's not interesting for me. I don't want to pay that much for this old crap.
Yeah, sure.
So I decided, no, okay, to have control of this again, and at least to regain some income from that, I would just simply re-record them, because then I have the rights again of this newly recorded tracks.
Sure. So as of now, you're saying that the early stuff, like Unification, the self-titled album, those albums aren't in print anymore? Is that what you're telling me?
That's what I'm telling you. If you have one, keep them. They will never be made again, as far as I know.
I did not know that.
So they are really collector's items.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's sad, because I mean those records when they came out, and I go back to those albums, at least for me, were important for me, especially when I started this show, because there's 7 German power metal bands that were like I still listen to this day, that are like I consider rock royalty on my show, and you obviously are one of them. But those records, those first couple albums especially, were very big for me back then, and very important. I did not realize that they were out of print. That's bad, because those albums are classic in my opinion.
Yeah. I just while you're talking, I just looked up Battering Ram on iTunes. It's still not there. I mean, all other albums are there, but that's because somebody probably at Universal simply forgot to upload this album. And that's for 10 years now.
Sure.
Nobody realizes that because nobody gives a shit for Iron Savior at Universal.
Right.
It's way too small, the band, that even the coffee maker dude will even look at it, But that's that's the reason. The reason is just up front of me here, and that's the reason why I really had to do this again, because I think it's great songs. It's great stuff that we did back in the days, and it was really pissing me off, that it's been treated that bad from Universal.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a sad thing, because those, man, late 90s for me, that was like the resurgence of heavy metal for me. That's when bands were really putting out some great stuff, and really this music started going back up. It started gaining in popularity, but the quality of the albums, it was just going up. And you were like a big part of that resurgence to me. And I'd say the first 3 albums in the EP were, in my opinion, very important records. And even to this day, I still think they were very important in being a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, also personally for me, I mean, this is the debut. That was the first record I ever made myself. It's super important for me, and so was Unification. I don't know. Unification was, for me, it was even more important, because I mean, there was the success of the first one, and I really didn't want to fuck up at all. I was really super highly tensed all the way. And I was giving 150 or even more % on each and every track, recording everything constantly again and again and again to make it as perfect as possible.
Sure.
I think, honestly, I have never ever worked again on an album so intense like on Unification. And so those are 2 really, really important albums for me. And yeah, that's it. We came out at a time when heavy metal was starting to have a second wave or so. There was the first new wave of British heavy metal, and there came all the new metal and grunge years, where you had to somehow survive in terms of music. And after people were getting sick a little bit of detuned guitar, out of tune guitars, and boring new metal grooves, bands like Iron Savior or Hammerfall came out at this time, and there was an interest again for this kind of straightforward heavy metal, or power metal, it's called nowadays.
Right. Sure.
And so for that reason, those albums, I'd say, until even including the Condition Red and also the Battering Ram album, they definitely did their share for this development we are looking at today. Dark Assault, like it or not, I do have some difficulty still. It's difficult still with this album, because I'm not happy with the production, with what I did here in the studio. But I think the songs are really, there's a lot of great songs on it, and
Sure.
Yeah. Made of Metal, Solar Wings, and or Firing the Guns. I mean, they're really bone breakers. I love them, and that in the sound of 2022, that really brings a big smile on my face.
And that's Pete Seelig talking about why the band re-recorded a lot of these songs. So I'll give you my thoughts really quick on it. First of all, Pete has been a long-standing supporter of this show since the very beginning. He first the first time he ever spoke to me was from his mom's house in San Francisco. Really great guy. Iron Savior is a band that has never really put out what I would consider a bad album. There are albums I like better than others, but they've never put out an album that I would say is bad, right? They never have. A very, very consistent band. Although I will say the more recent material, especially the last two albums, are among the two best they have put out. But anyway, let's go back to the songs being re-recorded from the early part of their career. So he touched on the fact that in that interview clip, he did not know who had the rights to these albums to be able to put them out again or do reissues again, or even buy the rights, to put it out, to own it himself. And that was the case with a lot of these bands that came on the Noise Records label, or in America, it ended up being called FAD Records. In the late 90s. A lot of people don't know or remember that. So a lot of those bands have had trouble finding out who has the rights to these records, especially, like a band like Gamma Ray was on Noise Records in, early 90s. They have their whole discography or the rights to it, I believe. But it's been sold, that whole catalog's been sold off multiple times. So he talked about it being difficult. So if you want to get the songs up on streaming and earn income from them, he has to re-record them himself and start from scratch and re-record them. The other thing he brought up is that he wasn't super happy with the production on some of those albums. So they have a single coming out called Eye of the World, which is actually my favorite song off of the album Dark Assault. And Dark Assault was a pretty good record, but you know what I didn't like about the album? I didn't care for the sound and the production and the mix on it. So Pete obviously emphasized he was not happy with the sound on some of these albums, and re-recording them could correct a lot of that and even bring new life to those songs. And I agree with him. So here's how I look at these re-recordings and how I view them. The stuff that has been re-recorded from the first, the very early days of the band, from the self-titled album and Unification, I think that the original recordings are better. Although it's interesting to hear some of the little nuances Pete adds to these tracks when he does re-record them. But generally speaking, I thought those albums were fine. When it comes to albums like Condition Red, Battering Ram, Dark Assault, I think the re-recorded versions of those songs sound a lot better. And he really did bring new life to those tracks. I went and listened to Dark Assault the other day, and then I went and listened to some of the re-recorded versions of those songs. For me, it's night and day. I think that the re-recorded versions are just so much better. And I'm really looking forward to this. Folks, I've liked this band since their debut album came out in 1997. I went and found the first album at a record store back in 1997. It was a record show. I'm sorry. They used to have record shows where people would sell old albums, and they would sell you would sell imports, and that's how I ended up getting it. I remember when I bought it, I bought Annihilator. It was Annihilator album. I think it was King of the Kill I bought there. And I bought the self-titled Iron Savior album. When I first heard Atlantis Falling, I immediately knew this band would be one that I would like for many years if they stuck around, and they did. So throughout most of the album cycles they have had, Pete has come on my show, and he's just always been a really cool dude each and every time. So definitely tremendous amount of respect for him and the band for sticking at it, really putting out very consistently very good albums. And I'm looking forward to this next Reforged album. I'm interested to hear what these re-recorded songs are going to sound like. So with that said, Going into break, I'm going to talk about Alcatrazz and their new record deal with Brave Words Records, and the album that ended up getting me into death metal, Symbolic by Death. All of that coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast. After this. Hey everybody, it's Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. I appreciate you watching this program, and if you want to see more of what I offer on this show, please by all means hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, follow me on any other social media outlet that you see this program, and again, I appreciate all of your support. Back here on the Metal Command podcast, Tony here with you. Let's talk about the album that ended up getting me into death metal. And that is the album Symbolic by the band Death, which came out back in 1995. And folks, up until this point, I was really not a big fan of death metal. I loved thrash. I loved all the Bay Area stuff. I loved old Metallica. I loved Exodus, Death Angel, all of those bands. I absolutely loved that kind of music. But death metal for me was really something that I just really couldn't get into back then. Now, to be honest, I was a teenager. I was young. I was really kind of sort of getting into this music back then at this point. But I remember when this album came out, and I remember friends of mine talking about how insanely awesome the actual album is. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to go out. I'm going to go look for this record. And I went out and bought it, probably a couple months after it came out. And I looked in a bargain bin, for like $2. They had a copy of Individual Thought Patterns. And I thought to myself, you know what? Let's take a chance on both of these albums. Now, keep in mind, this is before streaming. You didn't have high-speed internet back then. I mean, the internet was kind of in its infancy at that point. So I had no real way to check out what this band sounded like unless I was listening to them with somebody, which I didn't really have that opportunity. So I went out and took a chance and spent $12 on the new Death album. And this is the record that ended up getting me into death metal. And this is where I realized that Chuck Schuldiner was an absolute genius of a songwriter. Because this was unlike any other death metal album I had ever heard. Now, I had heard bands like Obituary, Cannibal Corpse. Obituary I like better now than I did back when I was a teenager, for sure. But I couldn't really get into like bands like Cannibal Corpse or anything like that. But Death was a completely different kind of band. And it opened me up to get into other death metal bands like At the Gates. And then later on, obviously, bands like Soilwork and bands like that. But man, the album Symbolic, to me, is one of the most incredible death metal albums ever written. A lot of progressive elements that were kind of ahead of their time at that point. I had listened, and then when I going back and listening to the discography, Death's discography, obviously you can see them kind of working up to this point. I love Individual Thought Patterns. I love Leprosy. I love the album Human. But generally speaking, Symbolic was it. Like, that was like, man. Hearing songs like Crystal Mountain, for example, probably my favorite song off of the album. But this was an album where it really changed my perception of death metal as a genre. Do I predominantly listen to it a lot? No. But it opened me up to find a lot of other great bands, death metal bands out there that I do enjoy and that I decided to explore because of the album Symbolic. It's interesting too, because 3 years later, was it 3 years later? I like to say 3 years later, maybe 4. I don't remember I don't remember exactly, but I ended up going to see Death play a show down at the old Peabody's here in Cleveland, which was in the Flats, if you're familiar with the Cleveland area. And Hammerfall opened up for them. And I ended up going down. It was when The Sound of Perseverance came out. I got to meet Chuck Schuldiner, who was a really freaking cool guy. I interviewed him in person, actually. And then I got to meet the guys in Hammerfall. I believe the Legacy of Kings album, their second album, was out back then. But Chuck was an incredibly cool dude. He came on my radio show, and then I got to meet him and interview him in person. And then I ended up getting to meet Oscar and Joachim from Hammerfall back then as well. But it was an interesting tour because you had this resurgent like old school style power metal band, traditional metal band in Hammerfall, playing and opening for the band Death. But the reception to the show was very, very good. I believe in Cleveland there was a local band called Medieval that ended up opening up for them. But that show was great, and it's the only time I ever saw Death perform. Chuck obviously passed away, after that. Not right after that, but, he eventually passed away. But, man, if there's an album that changed my perception of death metal as a subgenre, it's Symbolic. Because I just think it's a genius. It's a genius album. It really is. It's very melodic. It has a lot of great tracks on it, but Crystal Mountain is my favorite one. The other thing is the reason I'm bringing this album up is that it just came out on vinyl again. Now my son, this is one of his favorite bands, and I ended up picking up a copy of this for him on vinyl. And I should have picked one up. And this album had been out of print on vinyl for a long time. I mean, there were people selling them on eBay for like $600, $200. I think the Amazon Marketplace had one for like $780, something absurd. But then they came out with it on vinyl recently, like not long ago. I think early May 2025 is when it came out. I should have bought myself a copy. Because no sooner did they ship out all the pre-orders, it was out of stock. A lot of people love this record. Most people that I know say this is the best album Death ever did. I am in agreement with that. I love Individual Thought Patterns. I think The Sound of Perseverance is a good record as well. But this is the album that ended up getting me into death metal. So, folks, if you're into this band and you're into this album, where do you rank it in Death's discography? Do you like this album? Do you dislike this album? Share your opinion. I'm curious what all of you think, because I think this album is fantastic. Last subject of the day, Alcatrazz. Brand new album. Not brand new album. A brand new record deal Alcatrazz has with Brave Words Records. Let's get into this a little bit. Alcatrazz, of course, is a band that has been around for quite some time. Jimmy Waldo, Jimmy Waldo is the guy in the band that has really kept this band together and really kept this band going over the years. This band at one point featured Graham Bonnet as their singer. You also had Yngwie Malmsteen at one point in this band. You also had Steve Vai in this band at one point. Regardless, they have a brand new record deal, and they have a new singer, Giles Lavery. Now, Giles has been on the show. He sang in the last Jack Starr album, sang in the last Warlord album. He's got his own band, Dragon's Claw, but he is singing in Alcatrazz officially. Originally, he was doing the tour. I believe Doogie White was the previous vocalist, and they parted ways for whatever reason. And Giles decided to sing in the tour and just essentially became part of the band. Now, why is this signing good for this band? First of all, Giles works for the label. Number one. Number two, they have a great PR team. You have Mr. Michael Brandvold, who I've talked about before. You're part of the Brave Words brand. But what's great about this is that whenever they finish and record a new album, it's going to be promoted the right way. So I'm interested to hear what this next record sounds like. Actually, their recent material has been very good. I'll be honest and say, you know what? I didn't pay much attention to their recent albums, But I started checking that material out. I was really only familiar with the early stuff. But the recent material is actually very, very good. So I'm interested to hear what this album will sound like. I think when I hear Giles sing, I think, and I haven't really watched any videos of him singing with Alcatrazz, but I could see his voice fitting the style of music that this band writes, simply because of listening to even the old stuff. I mean, Giles, his voice would fit this stuff. So I'm really excited to see that this band, will most likely be putting an album out, hopefully soon, and that they are with Brave Words Records. Now let's get to one other subject. A little point of controversy, because the band obviously had parted ways with Graham Bonnet years ago. There are people out there that say, I won't pay attention to this band because Graham's not singing. Or, I think Graham Bonnet at one point was trying to say that, they shouldn't be going on without him. I don't know the details of the whole situation, but there are fans out there that think that, or that think, the typical no Alcatrazz without no Graham Bonnet, no Alcatrazz, that kind of nonsense. Well, first of all, the band is going to exist regardless of whether you want to listen to them or not. But more importantly, keep in mind, Jimmy Waldo has kept this band going. He's a lone original member, I believe, in the band. I think I take that back. The drummers, the drummer, original drummer came back to the band, obviously, but Jimmy Waldo's kept the band going over the years. Throughout various lineup changes, he has stuck with this band throughout the years. Putting together a new lineup of very good musicians, by the way. And Jimmy's a pretty talented musician himself. So, yeah, folks, as I always say, nobody forces you to buy it. But we've heard time and time again. Haven't we heard this story before? Think about it. Remember when Crimson Glory ended up with a new singer to replace Midnight with Travis Wills? Everyone said, no Midnight, no Crimson Glory. Now everybody's singing Travis's praises after seeing him sing live. You notice that narrative doesn't exist anymore. How about Warlord? The band that the other band Giles is fronting, without their founding member, Bill Samus, people said, no Bill, no Warlord. If I remember correctly, that album ended up getting phenomenal reviews. Many of those reviews said that the spirit of Bill's music, which there was a lot of pretty much his music on that album, that the band really did a great job on the record. It got almost nothing but positive reviews. The moral of the story is, let the music do the talking. I mean, to make this assumption that this band, that Alcatrazz, is going to put a crappy album out because Graham Bonnet is not singing for them is absolutely 110% absurd. Folks, I listen to music to see whether I like it or not. I don't care who's in the lineup. If it is good, it is good. Period. So I'm looking forward to this next release. I'm looking forward to checking it out. And after hearing the recent Alcatrazz albums, I'm even more optimistic, because I'll admit to you right now, I really didn't pay that much attention to those records. Part of that is so much stuff flying at me from the PR standpoint, from PR people, my email box getting bombarded with electronic press kits. But nevertheless, I'm really looking forward to this next chapter of Alcatrazz. I think Brave Words Records is the perfect place for a band like that. It's perfectly placed. Like, they are perfectly placed there. And I think it's going to be a great marriage between that band and this label. So with that said, that ends this edition of the Metal Command podcast. If you like what you saw and heard on this show, by all means, hit the subscribe button. Hit that little bell to be notified anytime I post any kind of content. And if you follow the show on any other form of social media, by all means, hit the like and follow button there. Thanks for watching. Stay metal.